Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we simply must talk about 2020 Governing Body Update number 8, which was recently released on jw.org. I've mostly been avoiding these updates because for the most part there isn't much substance to them. The first couple were interesting, but since then, it's just been a case of trying to persuade witnesses that the only possible way they can get through the pandemic is by being witnesses and by following the direction of the elders, etc. But this latest one is interesting. It's hosted by Gerrit Lösch, and Gerrit Lösch very much continues the sensationalist rhetoric that we saw right at the beginning of this series, when Stephen Lett hosted the first of these updates. Let's just remind ourselves of Stephen Lett's words in the very first governing body update, which was released on March 18th.
So the events unfolding around us are making clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
Just incredibly sensationalist, alarmist rhetoric coming from the governing body, again, early in the pandemic. This was again March 18th that this video got released, and a governing body member there wasting no time in pointing to a pandemic as evidence that we're in the final part of the final part of the last days of the last days. And as I said at the time, these words really will not age well. Pandemics, unfortunately, are inevitable. The Spanish flu reportedly claimed 100 million lives. The coronavirus, as of today, November 26th, 2020, has claimed 1.42 million. So compared to the Spanish flu, this still hasn't been the deadliest pandemic of the last 150 years. And since 1918 and the Spanish flu, obviously medicine has advanced dramatically to the point where just a few months into this pandemic, we're already at the point where vaccines are available and are starting to be distributed, making it hopefully unlikely that the coronavirus will surpass the Spanish flu. But even if it did, even if it were to surpass the Spanish flu, that doesn't make it a sign of the last days. It's an event in history. And interestingly, Robert Lucioni, after that first embarrassing speech by Stephen Lett on March 18th, Robert Lucioni did a morning worship on April 1st in which he seemed to just calm things down a little bit.
Well, we do not know where these events, current events, are heading. This may just be another marker in time and an event in history or not. But what we do know is that these events illustrate how quickly the world can become unglued and become completely faint out of fear.
So in just a couple of weeks, we went from Stephen Lett saying, well, this is surely a sign that this is the final part of the final part of the last days of the last days. Just a couple of weeks later, Robert Lucioni, in front of the Bethel family, is saying, well, this might be just another event in history. Who knows? So a far more pragmatic approach there from Robert Lucioni, but it seems Gerrit Lösch didn't read the script. And Gerrit Lösch is going back to Stephen Lett's jumping up and down about Bible prophecy and pointing to the coronavirus as evidence of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy regarding the last days. Let's take a look.
Keep on the watch. That's what Jesus told his disciples after describing the events of the last days. How long have you been keeping on the watch? We are certainly experiencing critical times hard to deal with. These are the conditions we've been preaching about for years. In this update, let's review some of the prophecies being fulfilled right before our eyes and reflect on the timeliness of the November campaign publicizing God's kingdom. First, think about the sign Jesus gave his disciples. In Luke 21:11, Jesus said we would see food shortages and pestilences in one place after another. Well, we are now experiencing the fulfillment of this part of the sign in a very pronounced way.
Are we really? The reason why Jesus was able to float the idea of food shortages and pestilences in one place after another is because there were food shortages and pestilences in his day. It would have been more of a bold prophecy if he'd said there will come a time during human rule when there will be no food shortages and no pestilences. That would have been extraordinary, given the size of the challenge in making that a reality. Instead, we have this prophecy of food shortages being a thing in multiple places, as opposed to just in one place, and pestilences being a thing in multiple places, rather than, again, in just one location on the planet. I don't regard that as being anywhere near a specific prophecy, and I don't regard the events today as being anything extraordinary when you look at human history and the fact that, again, even in the last 150 years, there has been a pandemic worse, or more deadly, I should say, than the one we're experiencing now.
A second prophecy to consider is recorded in Daniel chapter 2. There we read about an immense image representing a succession of human kingdoms from the Babylonian Empire down to today. The feet and toes at the bottom of that image represent the Anglo-American world power, and Daniel tells us they are partly of iron and partly of clay. Do you remember what this mix of hard iron and soft clay represents? The clay pictures the radical and popular elements within the sphere of the United States and Britain that weaken its ability to act with iron-like strength. Daniel 2:43 says, "They will not stick together one to the other." The Watchtower of June 15, 2012, pointed out clear evidence of the iron and clay when it said, "Opposing ideologies and close election results that do not end up in a clear majority have weakened the power base of even popular leaders so that they have no clear mandate to implement their policies." Would you agree that this is more evident now than 8 years ago when this was published?
No, I wouldn't agree. I just wouldn't. I mean, what is he even talking about? So he's referring to a watchtower of June 15th, 2012. Interesting that the governing body, or at least this governing body member, is quoting watchtower articles in the same breath as he might quote scripture. Isn't that interesting? The way the watchtower is apparently some sacred text that should be quoted from. But as you can see from the quote that he has selected, the language is in the past tense. In other words, this watchtower isn't saying there will be opposing ideologies and close election results that will not end up in a clear majority as we get closer to the end. The Watchtower article is written in the past tense. In other words, it's commenting on Anglo-America, which Jehovah's Witnesses now consider to be the feet of this image in Daniel. They didn't always consider Anglo-America to be the iron mixed with clay. When I studied this book, the Daniel's Prophecy book, when it came out in 1999, as I write in my book, in my memoir, The Reluctant Apostate, it was this book that kind of started me on the path to doubting the organization's teachings. But we were taught when we received this book that the iron mixed with clay was not specifically Anglo-America. It says the 10 toes of the image represent all such coexisting powers and governments. For in the Bible, the number 10 at times signifies earthly completeness. So it's referring to groups of nations of various different governments coexisting at the time of the end. They ditched that. They had new light. This was, I forget what year, it was in recent years. They said, no, actually, it is specifically Anglo-America. And this 2012 Watchtower that Gerrit Lösch is commenting on is talking about the Anglo-American world power and this idea of it being like iron mixed with clay. And again, the quote there is in the past tense. The common people undermine the ability of the Anglo-American world power to act with iron-like strength, also opposing ideologies and close election results that do not end up in a clear majority have weakened the power base of even popular leaders so that they have no clear mandate to implement their policies. So this is just what I call shoehorning. The writers here, just as the writers did who wrote this book, the writers are shoehorning world events into the narrative of Bible prophecy. So they're literally taking a verse in the Bible that's prophetic, and they're saying, what that we're familiar with about world history, and specifically recent world history, what could we make this apply to? They're doing it back to front. They're squeezing world events or their knowledge of world events into this framework of, in this case, a prophecy in the book of Daniel. And in this 2012 Watchtower article, they're not saying that there will be more close election results as we get deeper into the time of the end. They're simply saying, well, one thing that you can say about the Anglo-American world power is that it perhaps hasn't been able to act with the iron-like determination of previous empires because it's a democracy. That's effectively what the 2012 Watchtower is saying. But Gerrit Lösch has to put this prophetic spin on things and make out that the 2012 Watchtower writers were foretelling events now.
Would you agree that this is more evident now than 8 years ago when this was published?
Again, no. When you look at the history of election results in both the UK and America, because don't forget we're talking now about Anglo-America, so we can narrow this down to just the UK and America, and there have been plenty of close election results, both in the UK and America, throughout history, for as long as there have been elections. In fact, I'm looking here at a Britannica article, 5 remarkably close US presidential elections. The first one it cites is John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, 1960. It cites one in 1880, James A. Garfield, Winfield Scott Hancock, 1880, obviously before the last days began in 1914. George W. Bush, Al Gore in 2000, even I can remember that one. Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel J. Tilden, in 1876, again before the last days were supposed to have started. John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson in 1824. So just 5 examples there in this article alone of where there have been close election results. And aren't close election results inevitable when you have a democracy? What I think's happened here is Gerrit Lösch, and this is just speculation, I should say, I don't have any evidence of this, but it wouldn't surprise me if Gerrit Lösch filmed this governing body update in the immediate aftermath of the recent election, when it looked like it would be close, because there were some states that hadn't called yet. But since then, of course, we found out that Joe Biden won the election. Sorry to break it to you, Trump fans. And we found out that he won by quite a convincing majority over Trump. So it wasn't a close election. But it seems to me that what's perhaps happened is that Gerrit Lösch seized an opportunity to apply some obscure words in an obscure Watchtower article to what he saw at that time as being a close election result. Who knows? Maybe one day more light will be shed on this, but I'm sorry, Gerrit Lösch, it cannot be said that, number one, this was even a prophecy to begin with, because the 2012 Watchtower was looking back, not forward. And number two, it certainly can't be said that there has been any noticeable increase in close election results since 2012. Anyway, next clip.
Reflecting on the fulfillment of Bible prophecy that we are seeing right now can fortify our faith. In the following interview, Brother Richard Kelsey, who was baptized in 1941, shares his thoughts about what's helped him to keep on the watch for some 80 years.
I was baptized in June 1941 in Des Moines, Iowa, and at the same time as Peggy, we were baptized in a horse watering tank there. And this was shortly before the International Convention in St. Louis, Missouri. We as youngsters and children were all asked to sit in the first rows in front of the stage. And Brother Rutherford gave the talk, Children of the King. And during this talk at the conclusion, he said, there's a new book, the children book, and you will all get a free copy. That motivated me greatly. And of course, when it was studied later, that was even a greater motivation to serve Jehovah.
It absolutely infuriates me the way they do this. The way they take old publications that Jehovah's Witnesses today don't have access to and therefore can't read for themselves to see what's actually said. They take these publications and they point at them and just show them on camera, talk about what year they were released, talk about the title of the book. Again, witnesses don't have any opportunity to actually see for themselves what's in the book. Well, this particular book I have, along with many of the books from the same era in Watchtower history. Here it is, Children, 1941, written by Rutherford. Let me read a little bit to you. Page 366, because Rutherford wrote this in the style of a narrative. So this was supposed to be 2 young people, John and Eunice, having a conversation in which they would decide what they would do with their future, what their plans would be, how they should be living their lives, essentially, as young people on the brink of Armageddon. And you're laughing because this was written, obviously, in 1941, nearly 80 years ago. But let me read part 2 you on page 366. Armageddon is surely near, and during that time the Lord will clean off the earth everything that offends and is disagreeable. That's an interesting way of describing genocide. Then, by his grace, we shall begin our life with a greater vision and prolonged joy. Now we see by faith the great theocracy, and we are wholly and unreservedly committed to that righteous government. From now on, we shall have our heart devotion fixed on the theocracy, knowing that soon we shall journey forever together in the earth. Our hope is that within a few years our marriage may be consummated. John and Eunice were sort of in love with each other. And by the Lord's grace we shall have sweet children that will be an honour to the Lord. We can well defer our marriage until lasting peace comes to the earth. Now we must add nothing to our burdens, but be free and equipped to serve the Lord. So John and Eunice were a young couple who wanted to get married. And what they're saying here is, because Armageddon is near in 1941, because Armageddon is near, let's defer our marriage and focus on the theocracy, focus on serving Jehovah through his organization. 1941. Nearly 80 years ago, this couple were thinking, let's leave off getting married. Richard Kelsey at the Central Europe branch isn't going to read that to you, is he? He's just going to take the book off the bookshelf and let you briefly glance an illustration inside. No one gets to read it because it's not on Watchtower Online Library. Watchtower sued the Truth and Transparency Foundation when they participated in making this book and other materials available. Watchtower will do everything it can to stop witnesses from having access to these materials, but they have no shame whatsoever in allowing people like Richard Kelsey to name the publications and romanticize them, even though witnesses can't read for themselves the utter nonsense contained in their pages.
I started pioneering in September 1948, but I had already auxiliary pioneered, and of course that whetted my appetite for full-time service. We see world conditions worsening, and that could frighten us. It could be that faithful older ones would become discouraged after many years. And it's very important to have a close relationship with Jehovah, an intimate relationship. We look forward to his kingdom rule as the solution for all problems. Young ones will see the faithfulness of the older ones and will want to imitate their faith. And of course, that's pleasing to Jehovah. Well, when we heard that there was going to be a special campaign now, Peggy and I, my wife and I, applied for auxiliary pioneer service. We have been preaching God's kingdom for many years, and now there's a special campaign devoted to that subject, God's kingdom, and it's going to be a highlight in our many years of service to Jehovah.
Like Brother Kelsey, has your confidence in Jehovah's promises been strengthened by what you see happening today?
No, if anything, I'm being reminded of the incredibly exploitative organization I left behind, an organization that will leap on any sort of drama or any sort of misery or any sort of tragedy as an opportunity to push its agenda. And I'm grateful, if anything, when I see the way this organization is behaving during this pandemic. I'm very grateful to no longer be a part of it. I could have ended up like this Richard Kelsey, who, let's remember, is a member of the Central Europe Branch Committee, according to that caption when they introduced him. I think that's significant because I feel as though there have been two slightly underhanded things happening here. Well, not slightly. In the case of the children book, that was very underhanded, the way they just dangle it in front of witnesses. Again, not giving them the opportunity to read it for themselves. and see how utterly farcical the contents are. The second bit of underhandedness is the way Richard sort of plays the old age card, I think. He kind of pretends to be this helpless old man who's had this opportunity to get involved in this campaign. He and his wife Peggy, having spent so many decades in full-time service, now in their old age, this couple are able to get involved in this campaign where people in government are being bothered with unsolicited messages from witnesses about God's kingdom. What a privilege it is. In his long years of service, how wonderful that even this seemingly helpless old man can have something to do during the pandemic and can be involved in this initiative. He's not a helpless old man. I'm sorry. He's on the Central Europe Branch Committee. He's one of the most senior Jehovah's Witnesses in Europe. And they're presenting him and Peggy as this sweet old couple. They've been given something to do as well. Isn't it wonderful? No, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. What we have here, again, is an example of old people being trotted out with their experience of a lifetime being wasted in serving a man-made doomsday organization. They have wasted decades proclaiming an Armageddon that never came and never will come. And their experience is effectively being used as bait to lure the next generation of young people into making the exact same mistake they made.
People around the world realize how unusual it is to have a pandemic, food shortages, civil unrest, earthquakes, and other disasters all occur at the same time. Watching the fulfillment of Bible prophecies builds our confidence in other prophecies yet to be fulfilled. Prophecies that promise permanent relief from the problems we're dealing with. For example, as Daniel 2:44 tells us, soon God's kingdom will become the only government ruling over the earth, forever. Isn't it exciting that amidst these critical times we are participating in a special campaign clearly pointing people to the only real solution, God's kingdom? Some who were once associated with Jehovah's organization are also recognizing the fulfillment of Bible prophecy and have been motivated to come back. If you are inactive or disfellowshipped, we encourage you to speak to the elders in your local congregation. They'll be happy to assist you.
It doesn't surprise me in the slightest that many who were indoctrinated into being terrified about Armageddon, who were indoctrinated into thinking that Jehovah's Witnesses are the only true religion on the planet, and that everyone who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness deserves to die. It doesn't surprise me that people like that, who were disfellowshipped, or who became inactive while holding on to their beliefs, while holding on to their indoctrination, have been going back to the organization. Of course they will. It doesn't make it God's one true religion. It doesn't in any way validate the claims that people like Gerrit Lösch are making. All it means is that they've done a terrific job of indoctrinating people, mostly through fear. Let's be honest, that's mostly what being a Jehovah's Witness is all about at some level. Oh no, if I don't do this, I'm going to die at Armageddon. As a child, it's very much on your mind. It was on my mind. I'd better fall in line with this. I'd better do as my parents are telling me and take the meeting seriously and do the preaching work, because if I don't do the preaching work, I'm blood guilty, I deserve to die because I haven't been warning people about Armageddon, which is coming imminently. And if I want to survive Armageddon, I've got to do whatever this religion tells me to do, including refuse blood, if needs be. There's nothing to be proud of when it comes to filling the minds of children with that sort of fear-mongering, and there is no surprise whatsoever when these children grow up but hold on to that indoctrination and end up coming back because they've been disfellowshipped or they've gone inactive, and now they feel as though this really is the end. What else are they supposed to think? And where else are they supposed to go if they've held on to that indoctrination?
Just a few days into the November campaign, a sister in France got a call from a telemarketer. Let's listen as Brother Bruno Faure explains how she took advantage of the opportunity to advertise the kingdom.
This experience began when a sister received a call from a telemarketer. She listened to the saleswoman's offer, but then, instead of simply handing the call, the sister asked for the woman's opinion on the words condition. After she responded, the sister added that these conditions were all fulfilled by Jesus, and that deliverance will soon come by means of God's kingdom. The woman showed a real interest and offered to call the sister back with her husband after work to continue the conversation. Well, later the same day, this woman and her husband called back just as promised. They had a good discussion using the Watchtower number 2 being featured in our campaign. And they made an appointment to talk again the following day. Sure enough, on the next day, the couple was ready with their own copy of the Bible. They said that after carefully reading the Watchtower, they were touched by John 17:3 and realized the importance of studying the Bible. They explained that they were originally from Cameroon and they had become familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses when living there. When they consulted JW.org, they were touched to see the content available in their mother tongue. Now, they were interested in attending a meeting and continuing these Bible discussions. So arrangements are being made to follow up on the interest.
Clearly, the zealous efforts of our brothers in France and around the world are resulting in a great witness.
I hope you notice what Gerrit Lösch just did there. He has taken one story from a sister in France, and he said, well, clearly on the basis of this one story, the efforts of witnesses both in France and all around the world are giving a great witness.
A sister in France got a call from a telemarketer. She took advantage of the opportunity to advertise the kingdom. Clearly, the zealous efforts of our brothers in France and around the world are resulting in a great witness.
I'm sorry, Gerrit, but that's not how it works. You can't say that this is clear based on one story that has clearly been cherry-picked from France. And what I'd like to know is, why isn't the sister being allowed to tell the story? Why is the sister not even named? Why do we get instead Bruno Faure, or however you pronounce Bruno's name? Why is Bruno wheeled out to tell this story on behalf of the sister? That's what I'd like to know. And are witnesses really being expected to do this when they get sales calls, when they get telemarketing calls? And I've been a telemarketer, by the way. It hasn't given me too much sympathy, I'm afraid, for when I get telemarketers calling me now. But I've been a telemarketer, and I know how frustrating I would find it if someone I was calling with a very specific purpose in mind was trying to distract me with something else that was, it turned out, just about pushing their religious beliefs on me when I was trying to do my job. So even though I don't have much patience for telemarketers, I'm afraid, despite having been one, I do still feel as though this would be inappropriate, actually. It would be inappropriate for witnesses, just so they can count their time, just so they can put some digits down for how many hours they've spent doing preaching during the pandemic. No, this is a very cheap way of counting time. And yes, it's almost certainly going to work if you do this enough, if you make it a habit of ambushing people like this, and if you have hundreds of people doing it, almost inevitably it's going to work with someone. And in this instance, we have a woman from Cameroon who was already with her husband familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses.
They explain that they were originally from Cameroon and they had become familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses when living there.
We don't know what they mean by familiar. For all we know, they could have been Bible studies back in Cameroon, couldn't they? They could have been attending meetings, for all we know. And that's why they picked it up once they got the opportunity due to this call. But I don't see how you can point to one experience and claim based on that that this terrific witness is being given around the world.
Many people are surprised to see how quickly things have changed in 2020. Just a few months ago, life was very different. This is a very good lesson for us on how fast things can change in the future. Hasn't the fast-changing world situation heightened your appreciation for the need to prove yourselves ready? Rather than allowing distractions to diminish our spiritual alertness, now more than ever we need to pray, study, attend meetings, and stay active in the ministry. Thank you to all who have worked tirelessly on this kingdom campaign. If you haven't participated in the campaign yet, be sure to do so. What a privilege it is to advertise the kingdom, the solution to all of mankind's problems. By doing so, we can keep on the watch and prove ourselves ready. Please be assured of our constant prayers in your behalf and our warmest love. From the World Headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, this is JW Broadcasting.
So again, I just think it's a real shame that Gerrit Lösch has effectively gone backwards. He's gone back to the same doomsday fear-mongering that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, when Stephen Lett was saying, oh, this is the final part of the last days. He's gone back to that, and he didn't really need to. It would have been smarter for him to adopt the language that we saw used by Robert Lucioni when he said, well, maybe this is just another event in history. That would have been smarter, I think. And instead, stick to being responsible during the pandemic and making sure witnesses practice social distancing, get themselves tested when they can or when they need to. Just focus on the practical side of weathering the pandemic rather than making it all about exploiting a disaster, exploiting a tragedy to make sure people stay close to the religion or to even bring people into the religion, which is effectively what we're seeing here with this campaign. I mean, overall, I think when we look back on the coronavirus, when the coronavirus is finally behind us, again, Stephen Lett's words will not have aged well. Neither will the words of Gerrit Lösch, I think, in this particular governing body update. But when we look back on the coronavirus, I think for the most part we'll be able to say, well, they could have handled it worse. The organisation could have done what some religious fundamentalists have been doing and insisted that meetings go ahead, insisted that witnesses congregate in large numbers because this is their duty, this is their command to assemble together, and they need to put their loyalty to God first. I, for one, am grateful that they're not doing that, that they haven't done that. I live in the same building as two Jehovah's Witnesses who are in the age group that is at risk of coronavirus, of dying due to coronavirus, and I'm very grateful that they haven't been expected to go to Kingdom Hall meetings and assemblies. So I will always give the organisation credit for that. I just wish they hadn't stooped to using the coronavirus as a reason to scare people into thinking this is it, this is Armageddon. Now more than ever, which is what Gerrit Lösch was saying there, now more than ever, we need to attend meetings and do our preaching work and do our Bible study.
Now more than ever, we need to pray, study, attend meetings, and stay active in the ministry.
Again, it's exploitation, pure and simple. And it won't age well, this sort of thing. Activists in the future will be showing this video footage and the footage from Stephen Lett to demonstrate just how foolish and reactionary this organisation is when tragedy strikes. So those were my thoughts on 2020 Governing Body Update number 8. I hope you found them interesting. Please remember to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.